The wind howled like a living thing, a predator stalking its prey across the endless expanse of white. Antarctica was a place of extremes. Cold that could freeze the marrow in your bones. Silence, so profound it felt like the earth had stopped spinning. But for Alex and Riley, it was home for now. They were young, reckless, and brilliant in equal measure, part of an international research team stationed at McMurdo. The rest of the crew had gone back to the main hub for supplies, leaving the two of them alone to monitor some seismic anomalies that had cropped up near an uncharted crevasse. It started as a vibration under their feet, faint but insistent, like a heartbeat buried beneath miles of ice. Alex was the first to notice it, his hand pressed against the frozen ground as he muttered something about tectonic activity. Riley wasn't so sure. She'd always trusted her instincts more than data, and right now, her instincts were screaming that this wasn't natural. "Alex," she said, her voice muffled by the layers of her parka. "This isn't just some glacier shifting. It's something else." He looked up at her, his blue eyes narrowed behind frost-covered goggles. "Something else? Like what? Aliens?" He grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. They both knew Antarctica was full of mysteries. Fossils of ancient forests buried beneath the ice, meteorites from other worlds. But this felt different. The vibration grew stronger as they approached the crevasse, a jagged wound in the earth that seemed to stretch endlessly into darkness. Riley's breath caught when she saw it, a faint glow emanating from deep within, pulsing like a distant star. It wasn't natural. It couldn't be. "Do you see that?" she whispered. Alex nodded, his usual skepticism replaced by something bordering on awe. "Yeah, let's get closer." They rigged up their climbing gear in silence, the only sound the crunch of their boots on the ice and the occasional gust of wind. As they descended into the crevasse, the glow grew brighter, illuminating walls of ancient ice that seemed to shimmer with colors no human eye was meant to see. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. At the bottom, they found it, a massive archway carved from some kind of obsidian-like material, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when you looked at them too long. The glow came from within the archway itself, a swirling vortex of light and shadow that defied explanation. "It's a portal," Alex said, his voice barely audible over the hum that filled the air. "To where?" Riley asked. He shook his head. "Only one way to find out." They didn't hesitate. Not really. Maybe it was curiosity or arrogance or just plain stupidity, but they stepped through together, hand in hand. The transition was instantaneous and disorienting, a sensation like being turned inside out and back again in less than a heartbeat. When they emerged on the other side, they were no longer surrounded by ice and snow. Instead, they stood on a barren plain under a sky that churned with storm clouds shot through with veins of green lightning. The air was thick and heavy, carrying scents they couldn't identify, metallic and acrid and faintly sweet all at once. The ground beneath their feet was blackened and cracked, as if scorched by some unimaginable heat. And then they saw them, the inhabitants of this place. They weren't human, that much was clear. Towering figures with elongated limbs and skin that shimmered like oil slicks moved across the landscape with an eerie grace. Their faces were featureless except for glowing orbs where eyes should have been. Eyes that seemed to pierce straight through flesh and bone to stare into one's very soul. Riley grabbed Alex's arm. "We need to go back." But before they could even think about retreating, one of the creatures turned toward them. It let out a sound, a low-frequency hum that vibrated in their chests, and suddenly all of them were looking their way. "They've seen us," Alex said grimly. Riley pulled her knife from her belt. Not much use against whatever these things were, but it made her feel better anyway. "Then we make sure they regret it." What followed was chaos. A desperate scramble across alien terrain as the creatures pursued them with unnatural speed. They ducked behind jagged outcroppings of rock-like material that hissed when touched by their hands. They dodged beams of energy fired from strange devices held by their pursuers. They fought back with whatever they had, knives, flares, even chunks of rock hurled with all their strength. But it wasn't enough. They were outnumbered and outmatched in every way that mattered. And then Riley saw it. Another structure in the distance, massive and angular, and unmistakably artificial. It looked like some kind of fortress or command center, or maybe even another portal. "We can't fight them here," she said between gasps for breath. "But if we can get there, maybe we can shut this whole thing down." Alex nodded without hesitation. "Then let's do it." They ran toward the structure with everything they had left in them. Two tiny humans against an entire world bent on their destruction. And somehow, impossibly, they knew they would win. The weapons felt alive in their hands, humming with an alien energy that seemed to resonate with their pulse. Alex adjusted his grip on the sleek, metallic rifle, its barrel glowing faintly with a cyan light. Riley held a smaller device, something like a pistol but heavier and more intricate, with jagged edges that seemed to shift under her touch. They didn't understand how these weapons worked, but they didn't need to. They had learned long ago that humans didn't need to understand everything. They only needed to adapt. "All right," Alex said, crouched behind a jagged outcrop of blackened stone. "We got the firepower. Now we figure out how to use it." Riley smirked, her fingers brushing over the weapon's strange surface. "Point and shoot, right? How hard can it be?" Alex gave her a sidelong glance. "Let's hope that's all it takes. But don't get cocky. We're still outnumbered." "Outnumbered," Riley repeated, her grin widening. "But not outmatched." They both knew the truth of it. Humanity had always thrived under pressure, in situations where survival seemed impossible. It was in their nature to fight back harder when the odds were against them. And now, armed with the technology of their enemies, they were ready to prove it. The fortress loomed ahead of them, an angular monolith of dark material that seemed to drink in the dim light of this alien world. Its walls pulsed faintly with the same eerie glow as the portal they had come through, and strange figures moved along its battlements, guards patrolling with an almost mechanical precision. "First step," Alex said, scanning the structure through a pair of binoculars he'd salvaged from their pack. "We need to find a way in without alerting half the planet." Riley nodded, her eyes narrowing as she studied the layout. The guards moved in predictable patterns, their glowing eyes sweeping over the barren landscape, but never lingering for long. There were gaps in their patrols, small windows of opportunity that only someone desperate or insane would dare exploit. "Over there," Riley said, pointing to a section of the wall where a narrow fissure ran up its surface like a scar. "Looks like some kind of maintenance access." Alex followed her gaze and nodded. "Good eye. If we can climb up there without being spotted, we'll be inside before they even know we're here," Riley finished for him. They moved quickly and quietly, sticking to the shadows as they approached the fortress. The alien terrain provided plenty of cover, jagged rocks and twisted formations that looked like they had been scorched by some ancient cataclysm. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified in their ears as they crept closer to their target. When they reached the base of the wall, Alex tested the fissure with his hands. The material was cold and unyielding, but rough enough to provide decent handholds. "Think you can handle this?" he asked Riley. She rolled her eyes. "Please. I was climbing trees before I could walk." Alex smirked and started up the wall, his movements quick but deliberate. Riley followed close behind, her weapon slung across her back as she focused on finding her footing. The climb was harder than it looked. The fissure narrowed in places, forcing them to contort their bodies in ways that left their muscles screaming. But they made it to the top without incident. The battlements were eerily silent as they pulled themselves over the edge and crouched low behind a series of strange spires that jutted up from the surface like alien sculptures. The guards were farther down the wall, their glowing eyes fixed on the horizon. "Now what?" Riley whispered. Alex scanned their surroundings and spotted an entrance, a heavy door set into the wall a few meters away, guarded by two more of the towering aliens. "We take them out quietly," he said. Riley raised an eyebrow. "Quietly? With these things?" She gestured to her weapon. Alex hesitated for a moment before nodding toward one of the spires nearby. "Maybe we don't have to shoot them yet." He grabbed a loose chunk of rock from the ground and hurled it toward the spire with all his strength. The impact sent a sharp crack echoing through the air, drawing the attention of both guards instantly. As they moved toward the noise to investigate, Alex and Riley sprang into action. Riley lunged at one guard from behind, driving her blade into its neck with brutal efficiency, while Alex tackled the other one to the ground and wrestled its weapon away before delivering a crushing blow to its head. The whole encounter lasted less than 10 seconds. "Still think we're outmatched?" Riley asked as she wiped alien ichor off her blade. Alex grinned despite himself. "Not for long." They dragged the bodies into the shadows and slipped through the door into the fortress's interior, a labyrinth of corridors lit by that same pulsating glow. The air inside was cooler, but carried an undercurrent of something metallic and acrid that made their skin crawl. "This place is massive," Riley muttered as they moved deeper into its depths. "Yeah," Alex agreed. "But if we're going to shut this whole operation down, we'll need to find whatever's powering it and blow it sky high." Riley finished with a wicked grin. Alex couldn't help but laugh softly at her enthusiasm despite their dire situation. For all their fear and uncertainty, one thing was clear. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting back. And humanity? Humanity didn't lose fights like this. Not ever. The corridors stretched endlessly, a maze of alien architecture that defied human logic. The walls seemed to shift subtly as they moved, the pulsating glow casting strange, flickering shadows that played tricks on their eyes. It was disorienting, like walking through a living organism, but Alex and Riley pressed on, their stolen weapons clutched tightly in their hands. The fortress was not silent. Low-frequency hums echoed through the halls, an ambient sound that seemed to vibrate in their bones. Occasionally, they heard distant clicks and hisses, communication perhaps between the creatures that called this place home. Each sound sent a jolt of adrenaline through their systems. But they kept moving, their senses sharpened by the ever-present thread of discovery. Riley paused at an intersection, holding up a hand to stop Alex. She pointed down one corridor where faint footsteps echoed, a patrol approaching. Without a word, they ducked into an alcove, pressing themselves against the cold, shifting wall. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the faint hum of energy weapons. Two guards emerged from the darkness, their elongated forms moving with an unsettling grace. Their glowing eyes scanned the corridor methodically as they passed, oblivious to the two humans hidden mere feet away. Riley's grip tightened on her weapon as she held her breath, ready to strike if necessary. But the guards continued on, their footsteps fading into the distance. Alex exhaled slowly. "That was close." "Too close," Riley muttered. "We need to move faster." They slipped out of the alcove and continued down the corridor, their movements quick and deliberate. They didn't know exactly where they were going. This place was too alien for them to navigate with any certainty, but they followed their instincts, searching for anything that looked important. It wasn't long before they found it, a massive chamber at the heart of the fortress. The room was vast, its ceiling disappearing into darkness above. In the center stood a towering structure, a spire of black metal and glowing veins that pulsed in time with the fortress's eerie rhythm. It looked alive, like a beating heart pumping energy through the entire complex. "This has to be it," Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper. Riley nodded. "Looks like some kind of power source." They approached cautiously, their eyes scanning for any signs of movement. The chamber was eerily empty. No guards, no machinery, nothing but the spire and its strange glow. "Too easy," Riley muttered under her breath. Alex frowned, but didn't argue. She was right. It felt like a trap. But what choice did they have? If this spire was powering the portal, and possibly the entire fortress, they had to destroy it. As they reached the base of the spire, Alex examined it closely. The surface was smooth and cold to the touch, its veins of light pulsing faster as he ran his hand over them. "Think we can blow it up?" Riley asked. "Maybe," Alex said, "if we can find a weak point or overload whatever's powering it." Riley grinned and pulled a handful of small explosives from her pack, the last remnants of their equipment from McMurdo Station. "Good thing I came prepared." Alex raised an eyebrow. "You brought explosives on a research mission?" "Always be prepared," Riley said with a shrug. "Now help me set these up." They worked quickly but carefully, attaching the charges to key points along the base of the spire. As they finished placing the last explosive, a low rumble echoed through the chamber, a sound that wasn't coming from the spire. "They know we're here," Alex said grimly. Riley grabbed her weapon and turned toward the entrance, just as figures began pouring into the chamber. Dozens of them. The creatures moved with terrifying speed and coordination, their glowing eyes locking onto the two humans as they raised their weapons. "Guess we're doing this now," Riley said with a smirk. Alex nodded and raised his rifle. "Let's show them what humans are made of." The first shot fired by Alex's stolen weapon streaked through the air like a bolt of lightning, slamming into one of the creatures and sending it sprawling to the ground. Riley followed suit, her pistol emitting sharp bursts of energy that tore through their attackers with brutal efficiency. The creatures responded in kind, beams of searing light cutting through the air around them as they advanced relentlessly. But Alex and Riley didn't back down. They moved like seasoned warriors, ducking behind cover, firing in controlled bursts, and using every advantage their environment offered. For every creature they took down, two more seemed to take its place. But it didn't matter. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for victory. "This isn't sustainable," Alex shouted over the chaos as he reloaded his weapon. "Doesn't have to be," Riley replied with a grin as she triggered her detonator. The explosives went off in a deafening roar, shaking the entire chamber as fire and light erupted from the base of the spire. The structure groaned under its own weight before collapsing in on itself, sending shockwaves rippling through the fortress. The creatures faltered for a moment, just long enough for Alex and Riley to make their move. They sprinted toward an exit on the far side of the chamber as debris rained down around them. When they emerged from the fortress into open air once more, they didn't stop running until they were far enough away to catch their breath. Riley turned back toward the fortress and let out a low whistle as she watched flames consume its upper levels. "That'll leave a mark." Alex nodded but didn't smile. "We're not done yet." She followed his gaze toward another structure in the distance, larger than anything else they'd seen so far. It pulsed with an even brighter glow than before, a sign that whatever power source they destroyed wasn't enough to shut everything down. "One step at a time," Riley said with determination in her voice. "We'll take them all down if we have to." And so they set off again, two humans against an entire world bent on their destruction, but this time armed not just with weapons but with hope and fury unmatched by anything this alien planet had ever seen before. The ground trembled beneath their boots as they moved away from the ruined spire, the fortress behind them belching smoke and fire into the alien sky. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burning material, something metallic and chemical that stung their noses and left a bitter taste in their mouths. But neither Alex nor Riley slowed down. They couldn't afford to. The destruction of the spire had bought them time, but not much. The creatures would regroup, and when they did, they'd come back stronger, angrier, and more prepared. Ahead of them loomed the larger structure they had spotted earlier, a monolithic edifice that seemed to pulse with life. It was different from the fortress, less angular, more organic in its design. The walls curved and twisted like the sinews of some massive beast, glowing veins running across its surface in intricate patterns. It was unmistakably alien, but it radiated purpose. Whatever was inside that place, Alex and Riley knew it was important, critical, even to the creature's operation. "That's their command center," Alex said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion creeping into his limbs. "It has to be, or their hive," Riley muttered darkly. "Either way, we're blowing it to hell." They moved cautiously across the barren landscape, sticking to the shadows cast by jagged outcroppings of rock-like material. The terrain was uneven and treacherous, forcing them to navigate carefully to avoid slipping or making unnecessary noise. Every so often, they heard distant sounds, clicks, hums, and guttural growls that sent shivers down their spines, but they saw no signs of pursuit. Not yet. As they approached the structure, they spotted movement near its base. Patrols of the alien creatures moving in tight formations around what looked like an entrance, a massive archway carved into the side of the building. The guards were armed with weapons similar to those Alex and Riley had stolen, their glowing eyes scanning the area with mechanical precision. "Looks like they've tightened security," Riley said, crouching behind a boulder as she surveyed the scene. "Can't blame them," Alex replied. "We did just blow up one of their power sources." Riley smirked. "Yeah, we're really making friends here." Alex ignored her sarcasm and focused on formulating a plan. The guards were too numerous to take head-on, not without reinforcements or heavier firepower, neither of which they had. But there were gaps in their patrols, brief moments when the guards' attention shifted away from certain areas. "We'll need to create a diversion," Alex said after a moment. "Something to draw them away from the entrance." Riley raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly are we supposed to do that? We used up all our explosives back at the spire." Alex glanced around until his eyes settled on a cluster of strange structures nearby, tall, spindly towers that crackled faintly with energy. They looked like some kind of relay or communication system. "What about those?" he asked, pointing toward the towers. Riley followed his gaze and grinned. "Now you're thinking like a saboteur." They moved quickly toward the towers, keeping low to avoid detection. Up close, the structures were even more imposing. Massive pylons that hummed with power, their surfaces etched with alien symbols that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. "You think these things are important?" Riley asked as she examined one of the towers. "They're important enough to be guarded," Alex replied, nodding toward a pair of creatures patrolling nearby. Riley's grin widened as she raised her weapon. Not for long. The first shot took one of the guards down instantly, a bolt of cyan energy punching through its torso and leaving a smoking hole in its chest. The second guard turned toward them with alarming speed, but didn't have time to react before Riley's second shot hit home. "Still got it," she said smugly as she stepped over the bodies. Alex rolled his eyes, but didn't argue. Instead, he focused on examining the base of one of the towers for anything that looked like a weak point, a panel or conduit they could sabotage. "Here," he said after a moment, pointing to a cluster of glowing nodes near the bottom of one tower. "If we overload these, we get fireworks," Riley finished for him. Using tools scavenged from their packs, and more than a little brute force, they pried open one of the panels and began tampering with its internal components. Neither of them fully understood what they were doing. They were working on instinct and desperation more than anything else. But whatever they did worked. The tower began to emit a high-pitched whine that grew louder with each passing second. Sparks flew from its base as its glow intensified, casting eerie shadows across the landscape. "That's our cue to leave," Alex said urgently. They retreated quickly, but didn't go far. Just far enough to watch as the tower erupted in a brilliant explosion of light and sound that sent shockwaves rippling through the ground. The effect was immediate. Alarms blared from within the command center as guards rushed toward the source of the disturbance. "Works every time," Riley said with satisfaction as she watched the chaos unfold. With most of the guards now distracted by the explosion, Alex and Riley made their move toward the entrance. They moved swiftly, but carefully, weaving through shadows and avoiding any remaining patrols until they reached the archway. Inside was another maze, corridors lined with pulsating walls that seemed almost alive under their touch. The air was thick and humid here, carrying an unsettling sense of being watched at all times. "We need to find whatever's running this place," Alex said as they navigated deeper into the structure. "And blow it sky high," Riley added with her usual grin. But this time, there was no humor in her voice, only determination sharpened by rage and survival instinct. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore. They were fighting for humanity, for every person back on Earth who didn't even know this threat existed yet, but would suffer if these creatures ever crossed through that portal into their world. And if there was one thing humans excelled at above all else, it was winning impossible fights against impossible odds. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but Alex and Riley were ready for whatever came next. Because humanity didn't just survive, it thrived in adversity. And no alien force, no matter how advanced or powerful, could ever take that away from them. The corridors twisted and turned in ways that defied logic, the pulsating glow of the walls casting an eerie, otherworldly light over Alex and Riley as they moved deeper into the alien command center. Every step brought them closer to the heart of the structure, where they knew they would find whatever was powering this place. And, if they were lucky, the entire planet. The air grew heavier, thicker, as though the structure itself was aware of their presence and trying to suffocate them. But they pressed on, their stolen weapons at the ready. "We're close," Alex said, his voice low but steady. He could feel it, a faint vibration in the floor beneath his boots, a rhythmic pulse that matched the glowing veins running through the walls. It was like being inside a living organism, and the thought sent a shiver down his spine. Yeah, Riley agreed, her eyes scanning their surroundings for any signs of movement. Feels like we're walking into the belly of the beast. They rounded a corner and found themselves in front of a massive door, easily 3 times their height, and carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and writhe when they looked at them too long. The pulsating glow was brightest here, radiating out from the edges of the door like heat from a furnace. "This has to be it," Alex said. Riley nodded and stepped forward, examining the door for any kind of control mechanism. There was no obvious handle or keypad, just smooth, alien material that seemed almost organic. "How do we get this thing open?" she muttered. Before Alex could respond, the door began to move on its own. A deep rumble echoed through the corridor as it slid open with a fluid motion, revealing a chamber beyond that took their breath away. The room was enormous, its ceiling disappearing into darkness above. In the center stood an enormous reactor, a towering construct of black metal and glowing energy conduits that pulsed with an intensity that made their skin crawl. The air hummed with power, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to resonate in their very bones. "This is it," Alex said, his voice barely audible over the hum. "This is what's powering everything." Riley stared at the reactor for a moment before breaking into a grin. "Then let's blow it sky high." They moved quickly toward the reactor, their eyes scanning for anything that looked like a weak point or control panel. The structure was covered in glowing nodes and conduits, each one pulsing with energy that seemed to flow toward a central core, a massive sphere suspended in midair by beams of light. "That core," Alex said, pointing toward it. "If we can overload it, we take out this whole place," Riley finished for him. But as they approached the reactor, alarms began to blare throughout the chamber. The walls pulsed with red light as alien figures poured into the room from multiple entrances, guards armed with weapons that glowed menacingly in their hands. "Of course," Riley muttered as she raised her weapon. They couldn't make this easy. The battle was chaotic and brutal. The guards moved with terrifying speed and coordination, firing beams of energy that scorched the air around Alex and Riley as they fought back with everything they had. The stolen weapons in their hands felt like extensions of themselves now, tools of survival and destruction wielded with precision born of desperation. For every guard they took down, more seemed to take its place. But Alex and Riley didn't falter. They moved like predators through the chaos, ducking behind cover, firing in controlled bursts, and using every advantage their environment offered. "Keep them off me," Alex shouted as he reached one of the reactor's glowing conduits and began tampering with its controls. Riley nodded and threw herself into the fight with renewed ferocity. Her shots were precise, each one finding its mark as she pushed back wave after wave of attackers. She didn't think about how many there were or how impossible their situation seemed. She only thought about buying Alex enough time to finish what he was doing. "I've got it," Alex shouted after what felt like an eternity, but was probably only minutes. The reactor's overloading. A deep rumble shook the chamber as energy began to surge through the conduits toward the central core. The glowing sphere pulsed brighter and brighter until it was almost blinding. "We need to get out of here," Alex yelled as he ran toward Riley. "Don't have to tell me twice," she replied, firing one last shot before turning to follow him. They sprinted toward an exit on the far side of the chamber as alarms blared louder than ever and energy crackled through the air around them. The walls themselves seemed to shudder as though in pain, pieces of debris falling from above as explosions rippled through the structure. When they emerged from the command center into open air once more, they didn't stop running until they were far enough away to see the entire building begin to collapse in on itself. But even then, they didn't slow down, not until they reached higher ground where they could see everything, not just the command center, but the entire planet beginning to unravel. The sky churned with violent storms as cracks spread across the ground like veins of fire. Entire structures crumbled into dust while rivers of molten energy erupted from beneath the surface. "It's working," Alex said breathlessly as he watched the destruction unfold. Riley grinned despite herself. "Damn right it is." But their victory wasn't complete yet. Not until they escaped this dying world. They ran toward where they had first arrived, the portal still shimmering faintly in its obsidian frame amidst all the chaos. Guards tried to stop them along the way, desperate remnants of an army that had already lost, but Alex and Riley cut them down without hesitation or mercy. They had come too far to fail now. When they reached the portal at last, it felt like stepping back into salvation itself. The swirling vortex enveloped them once more, pulling them through space and time until they landed back on solid ground, this time surrounded by ice and snow instead of fire and ash. They collapsed onto their knees in relief as McMurdo Station came into view in the distance, a sight more beautiful than anything else in that moment. Behind them, Antarctica's sky lit up briefly, as if reflecting some distant explosion, a final testament to what they had done, not just surviving, but winning against impossible odds. Because humanity didn't just endure, it conquered. And no matter how advanced or hostile those aliens had been, nothing could stand against two humans who refused to give up.